What's up, metalheads? Welcome to the Scrap Metal Recycling Bin, where we revisit old episodes of the Scrap Metal Podcast. I am Metal Thrashin Chris, and as always, I am joined by John von Frankenstein. John, why don't you tell the people what episode we're going to be recycling today?
So today we are recycling episode 2, What is Heavy? This was a really fun episode. Again, second episode, so this is early on in the podcast here. And we were still figuring some things out structurally and stuff like that. So it's always fun to hear like the background drums still going on older episodes. That's still something that like it makes me laugh whenever I hear it now. But yeah, I love that like you could hear us getting a little bit more comfortable within the structure of the show and just like having fun. So in this episode, we were diving into what the true meaning of heavy is and what makes a band heavy, what makes a genre of music heavy, what elements do we look for, and is it necessarily a sound, is it the use of an instrument, or is it more so an attitude? Chris, would you say that your opinion in that episode stands true now, almost, 2.5 years later?
Yeah, I would think so, but at the same time, I think certain opinions change because I know at the end of the episode, spoiler alert, we kind of decided that heavy is more of a feeling because something that I know I talked about is that Black Sabbath is heavy and they couldn't get as distorted. It was really overdriven guitars, but part of it was Tony Iommi lost 2 of his fingers and needed to down-tune just so he could play his guitar.
Yeah.
And so the down-tuning helped make it feel heavy, but it didn't necessarily sound heavy because they couldn't get the distortion or the overdrive that modern bands can get now.
Right.
And I remember talking about the band Exhorder that kind of helped me realize just how fucking heavy Black Sabbath is because Exhorder is a thrash metal band that Pantera stole their sound from. And on their album, The Law, they have a cover of Into the Void. And it sounds great by them because it's in 1992. It's got that thrash metal sound to it, all the distortion, all the gain. The lead singer sounds great singing it. And the fact that a Black Sabbath song that was originally written or recorded probably at this time, maybe like 20-ish, 25-ish years earlier, sounds that good when played with a distortion guitar kind of shows like, okay, these guys knew what they were doing in, 1970. Like it's Tony Iommi knew what he was doing. If he had the tools that we have now, the song would have sounded the way Exhorder is playing it 20 years earlier.
Yeah. Oh,
you know? And it kind of also makes us think, because I don't remember when we would have brought it up, but like it's a lot of people love to talk about how classical music helped inspire some metal. If Beethoven had an electric guitar, he would have been inventing heavy metal back then.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of the same idea with Black Sabbath in that they sound so heavy out of necessity for Tony Iommi's injury. But when you hear modern bands with modern guitar sounds and modern technology, you're like, yeah, this shit is and always has been fucking heavy.
Yeah. It's the same thing as artists who go back and do heavy metal covers of classical music.
Yep.
What makes it heavy is the tonality. It's the scales that are used. It's the key that it's written in. If it's written in a minor key, you throw some fucking distorted guitar over it, and then of course it's gonna sound heavy as fuck.
Yep.
Because it's already written to be something that's menacing or something that sounds, dissonant. You bring that up a lot. How music that is written to be dissonant will immediately make it feel a little bit heavier and a little bit more kind of brash, and you feel a little bit more uneasy listening to it. And it's the riff in Black Sabbath itself, that tritone there is instrumental in adding to what makes the music sound so evil and make it sound so heavy.
Yeah.
When you've got a modern band covering those songs, I know that some of the argument that we were making was, is it heavy because it sounds modern, or is it heavy because it was just always heavy And the modern sound just makes it feel more of today, like, more like the music that we have today. And I think that's always super, super interesting. The fact that these songs were written when you could only get a really distorted, or really overdriven sound, and to the point of fuzz sometimes when you really tried to push it, is interesting. I mean, Black Sabbath, there's no doubt just how heavy they are. But with Black Sabbath, it was the subject matter that they were writing about that lended to just how heavy the music came across. I love, when we bring up older bands kind of being limited by the tools of their time, which is sort of that point that you were making, where this is as heavy as they could get. But yeah, I think it's the songwriting. And I think that much of my attitude or my opinion from that episode has stayed the same. That I think it has more to do with the attitude and the feel of a song.
Yes.
As opposed to the sound or the tuning that you're in that will make it sound heavy. We might have even brought it up in that episode. The breakdown in Domination is heavy.
Yeah.
It's heavy because it's all the instruments just smashing down on this riff in unison.
Yeah.
And I've heard the song covered in lower tunings, and it doesn't make it sound any more heavy. It's just heavy because it is. That's a heavy riff. It's the riff itself. It's the rhythm. It's the fact that the entire song slows down at that point.
Yes.
That's what makes it heavy. So, you brought up just before we started recording kind of my fascination with Meshuggah, thanks to Mistress Julia of Uranium. And how, back then I was like, oh, this is the heaviest thing around because Mistress Julia said that they are the heaviest fucking band. And why? Because they're using 8-string guitars, which back then, we're talking 2003, 2004 when the Nothing album came out. And they were getting custom instruments made, custom 8-string guitars. Now we've got 9-string guitars. It's like I guess to me, it's kind of, you reach a point of absurdity. Like, it doesn't make it any heavier. You're just increasing the range of the instrument. So
yes,
a lower note isn't necessarily going to make it heavier. It's just now adding a different color that you can add to your palette. What you're able to write with. A band that I would struggle to call heavy. They're definitely like super alternative and super proggy, but the band 12 Foot Ninja uses super like ridiculous low tuned guitar parts to accent other parts of their songs. So they'll play a riff in more or less standard tuning and then drop a whole octave down and then play the riff again. So now that adds another accent. It makes it heavier because there's something different. That lower tuning helps to differentiate that part of the song in the same way that the breakdown riff in Domination is accentuated by the fact that now the song has slowed down.
Yeah.
It's that contrast that gets built there. I think it's the contrast that gets built, not necessarily the tuning. I mean, there are plenty of thrash bands that play in standard tuning.
Yeah.
That I think you would still consider heavy, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're talking a lot about tunings and, Tony Iommi's need to tune down just to make it comfortable for him to play guitar. But yeah, like you're saying, there's thrash metal bands, I feel like the big four, they were playing in standard or half a step down.
Yeah.
They weren't playing drop C. That didn't come around until the late 90s, when the advent of new metal and things like that. So yeah, you can get heavy without having to down tune your guitar or having to add strings to your guitar to make it sound deeper and heavier. Like you're saying, it's the thrash metal of the 80s. They were playing on their 6-string guitars in either standard or half a step down, which like half a step down helps with that uneasy feeling. It kind of helps with, having that sound that like playing in a minor key helps with. I think that's what makes a band like Weezer, for me, kind of interesting to listen to. They play exclusively a half step down. So even though it's very much like kind of sort of radio friendly garage rock, it is half a step down. So it feels a little different than the other rock music you might hear on the radio or
Right.
in college rock. So yeah, you don't need more strings. You don't need to down tune. I was actually thinking, as we're talking about 7-string, 8-string, 9-string guitars, I would probably get made fun of for saying that they're heavy, but some of the riffs from CKY, like a song like Escape from Hellview or 96 Quite Bitter Beings, it kind of has a slower, almost heavier tempo. They're talking about this fake or made up Hellview with demons attacking people.
Yeah.
The guitar player had 4 strings on his guitar. He's like, I don't need the high B and the high E. I don't play solos. I'm saving money by not buying those strings. So he's only got the E, A, D, and G strings. I believe they were in like E standard. I don't think they were down tuned at all.
They were in E standard and throwing an octave pedal down.
Yeah.
But still playing in E, and that's what you hear. Like that real, what makes CKY's riffs, at least like in Bitter Beings, what makes it sound almost like a synth is that octave pedal.
Yeah.
And it adds this really cool sound that, like, it was years later where I realized, like, oh, that's what's making that sound so cool.
Yeah. But it's kind of going along with what we're saying. You don't need more strings. You can do less strings. I don't know how I came about it, but I was listening to Black Thunder by The Who.
Okay.
Like the Mongolian metal band, atmospheric band. I'm pretty sure that dude is playing an instrument with 2 strings on it. And it sounds heavy as fuck. That song is so fucking heavy.
Yeah.
And he's got 2 strings. You don't need more strings to be heavy. You can actually play on less strings and be heavy.
But yeah, you're right. It has to do with, I think it has to do with what you're doing with the instrument.
Yeah.
What are you doing with the instrument? Are you creating the contrast? Because, like, I mean, for someone who isn't a musician, for someone who isn't a guitarist, for someone who is not someone that's very knowledgeable in terms of, guitar tunings and the number of strings that someone has, you may show them something by Korn and they'll think it's heavy because of the rhythm, because of the groove, because there's yelling, there's harsh vocals. But I don't think they're going, oh, this sounds like a lower tuning, so that's why it's heavy. Because they have nothing to compare it to. Korn always plays a step down, in basically D standard plus the low A from the 7-string. So I think in the same way that I'm saying a band like 12-Foot Ninja creates that contrast by being in standard tuning and then suddenly dropping down an octave, that's what's creating now that additional color, and it makes it feel heavy because it's something that you have something to compare it to that came before. If you're constantly playing in that lower tuning, will it feel heavy just because of the tuning, just because of the additional string? Maybe not. That might not be exactly what it is. The band Nevermore, Jeff Loomis plays on a 7-string, but it's all in standard tuning. So the 7-string helps to add additional range to the instrument.
Yeah.
But he's really playing it as if he's playing in standard tuning just with a 7-string guitar. So he's, again, able to he makes great use of the additional range that you have, because then you're able to create that contrast in those parts when you've got to repeat a riff, and now he can do that on the lower string, and it gives it that extra, like, oh, okay, now it feels heavier because we were in a higher tuning before, or we were in a higher register before, and now we've dropped down to the lower register that this instrument's capable of. It's I mean, I could go on and on about this stuff. We already have.
Yes.
That's why we're doing this. We're recapping it for you guys. But in terms of, because I feel like there were comments made about, like, well, what about, like, screaming? Is screaming not an element that will make a song sound heavier? And I think so. It's going to be something that is more. It tips you off that you're listening to a heavier style of music.
Yeah.
When you hear harsh vocals, right? But you've got just as much power metal and just as much like heavy metal. I'll bring up Nevermore again. Warrell Dane sang in an operatic voice, and that sounds heavy as fuck when you hear him singing over their music. But he wasn't really using very harsh vocals. It was very rare that he would hear a growl or something from Warrell Dane. And that's why, again, I think it has to do with the contrast. If the music is always screaming and yelling and harsh vocals, it will be heavy because of the rest of the songwriting. But I don't think that necessarily is going to make it heavy. It's just another element that we're accustomed to hearing in that style of music.
Yeah, and you brought up something before that I thought was interesting. Talking about Korn, how they always play in the same or a similar tuning, and so you don't necessarily have that contrast. The first time you hear it, if all you've been listening to are other bands that play in standard, if the first time you hear someone playing in drop C or drop D, you're going to notice that.
Yeah.
But then when that's all you listen to, you do get used to it. You get used to the idea that, yes, this band. And so if you're used to the band playing in that style, where is the contrast?
Yeah.
And so in a similar way, the first time you hear drop tuning, the first time you hear death metal growls, the first time you hear screaming or yelling or shouted vocals, that's a sign to someone who hasn't heard that or doesn't regularly listen to that style of music, saying, okay, this is going for a heavier feel than I normally listen to.
Yeah.
And the more you listen to it, it's for fans of the style, we as of this recording recently came out with a metalcore episode. And I discussed how all of the elements of metalcore are elements that are apparent and exist in the styles of music that I love, but I don't like metalcore. And so for someone who listens to a lot of different hard rock and heavy metal and thrash metal and death metal, metalcore doesn't do it for me because there's already heavier, faster, more interesting metal for me to listen to. But someone who is hearing metalcore for the first time and has never listened to any hard rock or heavy metal, it's going to sound very heavy to them. And if that's heavy enough for them, if that feels heavy enough to them, that's great for them, and that they found this new style of music that they can enjoy. But for someone like myself, who's usually looking for not necessarily the heaviest, but definitely the fastest and most aggressive music, it doesn't do it for me. And so I think it was interesting because I felt like my opinion changed a little bit when we came out with the episode and when we recorded it, because we did kind of decide, heavy is a feeling. And for me, I was always kind of looking for, well, no, heavy is faster and more aggressive.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's heavier. If Black Sabbath can be heavy without being fast or aggressive, then, listening to the fastest and most aggressive grindcore and death metal doesn't intrinsically mean that it's heavier.
Yeah.
It just means it's more aggressive.
Yeah.
So we continue to have this interesting discussion and this interesting debate about what does heavy mean?
Yeah.
And it's fun to have that discussion.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, in the episode, we kind of got into even like heavier hip hop artists. Like I remember bringing up DMX at one point and talking about how like that's heavy. You know what I mean? Like hearing, again, in contrast, if you've only ever listened to, Jay-Z or Lil Wayne or, Triple X Tension or whatever his name was. And then you listen to DMX and it's like, oh shit, this guy's fucking mad as fuck. You know, he's fucking barking at me. What the hell? Like that is going to create this sense of like, oh, this is, they may not call it heavy. You know what I mean? Fans of the music may not call it heavy, but there is something that immediately says to them like, oh, this is more aggressive. This is more hardcore. This is more, you know, just there's something more to it. There's more grit to it. And I think that you can't discount the fact that the reason why you had the gangster rap wave, you know, with bands like or groups like NWA and, you know, and DMX, is because people were looking for something with a bit of a harder edge to it.
Yeah.
You know, Public Enemy even.
Yeah.
You know, getting a bit of a harder edge to it, be it by the lyrical content, the delivery, the vocal style. It's in any style of music, I think there are always going to be heavy parts.
Yeah.
You know, you can always find a heavy part. I talked about the band Snarky Puppy, where you've got like this one horn breakdown that they have, which to me is a really heavy part because it brings in elements of heavier music that I listen to. You know, the backbeat, the kind of bounce, like the bounce that you get from a breakdown. The horns are basically working like gang vocals and guitar, and then you do get gang vocals within that song too, you know. And I think it is a feeling, but I think the heaviness has to come from some sort of contrast. So I think my opinion has stayed relatively the same, but maybe now with the additional context of saying you need some context in order to make something heavy.
That's interesting. Because like I was saying before, and I feel like it expands on something that I was talking about before, is that you need context, you need that comparison. If you've only listened to one style of music, you listen to a new style of music, it sounds heavy to you. To someone who only listens to that style of music, they're just like, no, it's not heavy, it's just who they are.
Right.
And I think that's, you know, talking about rap and hip-hop artists, that's what attracted me to an artist like DMX and especially Public Enemy, is that they are very aggressive in their sound, especially DMX, very aggressive. And what I love about Public Enemy and Chuck D is that he's a contrast from NWA, in that NWA is presenting this gangster lifestyle. Ice Cube is talking about having to fire his AK in the streets of South Central Los Angeles because all the gangs are coming for him because he's like the hardest motherfucker in South Central, and he's got to shoot his AK at anyone who comes towards him. And it's kind of glamorizing this gangster look, and he's being aggressive about it to be as entertaining as possible.
Yeah.
And you contrast that with Public Enemy and Chuck D, who isn't really relying on that. He's singing more about and rapping more about the struggles that Black people have to go through in this country. And he is talking about those issues and race issues. And he's so mad about that, it almost feels heavier because he is just as angry as Ice Cube is for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
Ice Cube is mad because he's a gangster who's mad all the time because people are trying to kill him all the time. He's got to keep these people back with his AK-47.
Yeah.
Chuck D is mad because why do I have to keep singing about these struggles? Why do I have to keep pointing out these struggles? And so in that case, his anger mixed with the message makes it heavy to a suburban white kid who does not listen to rap or hip hop. But then when I hear Chuck D getting mad about these issues, a fellow New Yorker, a fellow Long Islander, mad about these social issues, it also kind of introduces me to those social issues. So not only am I mad with him, like I'm feeling how heavy it is, and then I'm like, yeah, that is fucked up.
Yeah.
That you have to sing about this. And so it's, again, it adds to the feeling, because someone who only listens to Public Enemy, they might like it because Chuck D does have that sound to his voice and the way he raps. But to someone who doesn't listen to it, and then all of a sudden I'm introduced to Chuck D through Anthrax, I'm introduced to Public Enemy because they used a sample from a Slayer song. It introduces me to this idea, and I'm able to say, yeah, he's fucking, like, that's fucking heavy. Like, it's what he's doing is heavier than Anthrax, who introduced me to him. Like, it's, and so it's like you're saying, the context is what does it. And as you start to listen to different music and different styles of music, something that to me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's, it's not that heavy, to someone who doesn't listen to it will say it's heavy. In the same way, I will listen to Mortician, which to most people would be like, that's way too fucking heavy. There's chainsaw sounds. Half the song is a clip of a woman being murdered in a horror movie. And then the rest of it is indistinguishable vocals and low sounds and drums. To me, that's like getting as heavy as it gets. And to other people, they'd be like, I don't even want to fucking listen to that.
Right.
But if I listened to the music that they listened to that they considered heavy, if it's different from what I'm listening to, it can feel heavy just because it's different from what I'm used to. And I think you make a good point, is that the contrast is what adds to how heavy something is. We talked about in our breakdown episode, you talked about Domination. That slowdown before the breakdown, that's heavy.
Yeah.
And there's this idea that metal and punk is fast.
Yeah.
So if these guys are slowing down, you should all be scared. That's kind of what it is. It's like, wait, the guys who play at 220 beats per minute are suddenly cutting that in half?
Yeah.
We should all run for our lives.
It's the same reason why the death bell is so effective in heavy music. Where these guys are playing blast beats the whole entire time, and then suddenly the song goes quiet and you just hear ding, because the fucking beatdown is coming. And that's fucking great. It's so cool. It's like, again, it's created by the contrast of this. We were just getting pummeled by all of the guitars and the drums and the vocals, and suddenly everything cuts out, and now there's this one, what could in any other scenario be just a pretty little bell sound. But that's the signal to everyone, like, fucking take cover. You're going to get fucking smacked in the back of the head, It's great. It's great. And it's exactly that. It creates anticipation. It creates contrast with the rest of the song. And it just creates a moment that feels like the bell. The bell on its own is not heavy.
Yeah.
It's what is coming that's heavy. And that's what makes the bell so heavy. So it's this cycle.
Yep.
It's a circle. It's a circle there of the heavy metal life cycle. And yeah, I love that the more and more we have this discussion, we are finding that there are other elements that lead to something being heavy. I know we talked about Lorna Shore as well. And kind of like being heavy for heavy's sake, that opinion has maybe changed. Just because I don't love the music doesn't mean it's not heavy. But I think that there's an element of showboating that is like, at the time we recorded that episode, the clip from Into the Hellfire was like just going viral. So I'm seeing people reacting to it on YouTube, like every other video suggested to me is reaction to Lorna Shore. I'm like, it's not, because to me, I'm also listening to Cannibal Corpse and fucking Suffocation and, Black Dahlia Murder, like bands that are heavy, bands that have similar elements to them, vocalists who sing in a similar way. So to me, it wasn't heavy because, like you said, I'm already kind of accustomed to this. But for a lot of people, my favorite videos, my favorite reactions were the people who don't listen to this style of music, who are being shocked, being surprised, being appalled by these growls and these, which take an immense amount of talent. We've spoken time and time and time again about just how hard it is to scream and scream correctly and to be able to create a unique sound. So the people who are hearing this sound for the first time, those are the best reactions.
Yeah.
Because they don't have anything else to compare it to. They've never heard anything like this. For me, it's not to say that everything that I listen to is heavier than Lorna Shore. It's just very similar to it. So to me, it didn't stand out. It wasn't something that really, it didn't do anything for me. Because I had listened to the song as a whole and I'm like, I can't get into it.
Yeah.
So this one part where you've got, these snarls and these pig sounds and these gutturals that are great, it just didn't really do anything for me.
Yeah.
And in a similar way, like when deathcore came out, I was not a fan of deathcore because I felt like it was in the same way that you felt towards metalcore. I was like, these guys all think that this is the heaviest fucking thing going. And I don't get it. Like, why is Whitechapel suddenly taking the fuck off? Why is everyone fucking obsessed with, like, All Shall Perish? And the funniest fucking thing happened is I'm on TikTok and there's this dude in his backyard with a cowboy hat on, jeans up to his fucking nipples, and cowboy boots. And the song Wage Slave starts. And it's a... and there's a fucking cowbell. And I'm like, oh, fuck. That sounds heavy. And it's this fucking deathcore band. And then I got into them. So, like, it took a certain thing. Like, I'd never heard what sounded almost like a groove metal intro with the cowbell over it. That's what made me say, oh, that's heavy. Because that was a very unique sound. That was not like anything else that I'd been listening to. And it caught my attention and let me dive into it. So now I'm going back and I'm listening to All Shall Perish. That album, The Cost of Existence, I believe it is very heavy. And now that I'm more into hardcore than I was back then, and now that I have a broader palette of music that I'm listening to, I'm like, cool, I can get into this now. And it is heavy because you are getting some of the elements of hardcore. It was just maybe the gatekeeper mentality that I had when the style of music first came out, where I'm like, yo, everybody's fucking obsessed with Job for a Cowboy, so that means I'm not even gonna fucking listen to them. Yeah. Which, I mean, Job for a Cowboy's fucking great. They're really fucking cool, And it's like, it is so funny how your opinion will change, and I love that we can allow ourselves to have that change of heart and to have that growth. Yeah. To say, yeah, you know what? Hey, I used to be a dick about this band and fucking hated them, but they're actually really fucking good.
See, I have no choice but to be a dick because Job for a Cowboy is a 4-word name band. So I can't listen to them.
Very good.
One thing I want to make sure I mentioned, and I just remembered it while we were talking about it, I don't know how much of it comes from fans, I don't know how much of it comes from bands, but like you're saying, when this idea goes around that this is the heaviest fucking thing in the world, and you listen to it and you're like, really?
Yeah.
Is the idea that I introduce, which is a film phrase, show, don't tell.
Yeah.
Don't tell me you're heavy. Just be heavy. And I will either agree or disagree with your assessment of your heaviness.
Yeah.
And I think that's what will frustrate someone like myself and kind of brings out that gatekeeper mentality, is when you have everyone saying, this is the heaviest fucking music in the world and everyone should listen to it, and you're just a fucking boomer who likes, old metal music that doesn't want to listen to the new heavy stuff. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but my boomer metal is heavier than this. Like, it's I hate to be the one to tell you, but you're wrong. And that's when it comes out, is when there's this insistence that it's heavy. It's like, if you have to tell me it's heavy, then it's probably not heavy. I think you even quoted Game of Thrones. If you have to tell people you're the king, you're not the fucking king.
Yeah.
And so I think it's when things like that happens, it brings out the gatekeeper side of us, and we kind of get like, no, you need to pump the brakes. But at the same time, I feel like there was also a time where like I did that, where I was like, I just discovered this band and they're the heaviest thing in the world. And it's like, bro, you're listening to like medium range, like thrash metal that's a little bit heavier than the new metal you're listening to. There's like death metal and grindcore that makes thrash metal look like pop music. Like, you know? So it's, and I think that's why for me, it was always escalation. I was always like, no, I need to be able to claim that I listen to the heaviest possible music so that no one can gatekeep and tell me I'm not listening to the heaviest music anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's my fucking, like, my metal workout playlist is like a varying, you know, you have varying degrees of heaviness throughout there. And you've got like Domination, but then I'll have like Kubla Khan, Come On, and then I'll have like Dissection, and then it'll be Knocked Loose, and then I've got like a Slipknot song. Where in high school and middle school, I was like, Slipknot's the heaviest fucking thing. Because they were the heaviest fucking thing that I was listening to at that time. They were the most aggressive. They were the heaviest thing.
Yep.
And so it's so funny to be able to listen to a song like Surfacing, which is a heavy song, but it used to be, in my mind, the heaviest song.
Yeah.
And then to hear something like The Hammer or True Fear by Kubla Khan and just be like, oh, fuck. You know what I mean? It's like, it's such a departure from where I was back then. And there are elements that make that music heavy. There's a rawness to it. There is a raunchiness to the vocal recording. There are the elements of hardcore that get brought in. There are the call outs. So like all these different elements, you're always going to find elements that will make the style of music that you're listening to heavy, and they'll be heavy for you.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of discovering more music. Yeah. That you'll be able to say like, oh, this is now the heaviest thing that I listen to.
Yep.
Like you said, it's that escalation and it's that constant search of us as music fans for that next heavy thing.
Thanks for checking out the Scrap Metal Recycling Bin. Remember that new episodes of the Scrap Metal Podcast come out bi-weekly here on YouTube, as well as wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Be sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, stay metal.